My name is Cyril Penarts. I'm Professor of Cognitive and Systems Neuroscience at the University of Amsterdam. In the Human Brain project, we asked, can we simulate cognitive and perceptual operations in the brain by computer models with realistic dynamics and anatomical detail? If this feat could be accomplished within the same framework, this means we're closing in on the gap between the brain as a physical organ and the mind. We will better understand what it means to have or to be a ghost in the machine. We'll start at the small scale of brain cells and their activity, electrical impulses or spikes. We will show how the plasticity or malleability of the connections between cells in the cortex naturally leads to the emergence of oscillations in activity. These wave patterns are important for communication between brain areas. Using this detailed knowledge, how can we build a realistic model of object perception? Here we face the problem that our brain cannot see external objects directly, as it receives the information only indirectly, namely via the sensory nerves to the brain. The brain must build a representation of what is going on in the outside world. To model this, we use the principle of predictive coding. The brain learns to build up an internal prediction or representation of what is going on externally. Finally, we extend this paradigm to enable more complex cognitive abilities in large-scale models. In one of these multi-area models, we show how motor movements affect predictions about our visual environment and how the brain cleverly segments objects from the background. While doing this, we use the research infrastructure eBrains originating from the Human Brain project. What you will see emerging is something quite new and fascinating. Perception and cognition used to be modeled by quite abstract computational schemes, but now we connect cognition to its underlying neural substrate, down to its tiny realistic elements.
I'm Giulia Moreni, a PhD candidate at the University of Amsterdam. Our research focuses on building a biological realistic model of the cortical column in the primary visual cortex of the brain, V1. The cortical column serves as a fundamental unit of brain function, and investigating its dynamic is of great scientific interest. Oscillations are a prevalent feature of electrical brain activity. They are believed to play a key role in neural communication. Thus, we were interested in investigating them from a model perspective. The cortex consists of 6 distinct layers, L1 to L6, each represented here in different colors. Our model replicates this structure and incorporates various neuron types. 1 type of excitatory neuron and 3 types of inhibitory neurons are included in each layer, depicted here in different colors. One fascinating aspect of the brain is its plasticity, its ability to adapt and learn. Neuronal connections undergo experience-dependent changes in strength over time. Thus, we introduce a dynamic element to our model by allowing the strength of connection to evolve during the simulation, rather than remain fixed. This results in the emergence of oscillatory activity among the neurons. Let's look at the model in action. Here, you can observe the activity of neurons as they transmit signals to others. On the x-axis, there is time, and on the y-axis, the range of neurons in a column. When a neuron spikes, a dot appears. Notice how numerous neurons become active simultaneously, engaging in mutual interaction. In the absence of oscillatory activity, random firing patterns are observed. However, at the 56th second, when an input is applied to layer 4, an oscillatory pattern emerges. Neurons synchronize their firing, generating regular temporal intervals. Importantly, this phenomenon only occurred when introducing plastic weights to the model. When the connection between neurons had fixed strength, such oscillation could not be observed. My colleague, Kwang-Jun Lee, will show how we use this model to study how a perceptual function, predictive coding, could be realistically implemented.
Hello, I'm Kwang-Jun Lee, a PhD candidate at the University of Amsterdam. As Professor Penarts mentioned, the brain constructs an internal model of the world through processes of prediction and learning. While predictive coding is a leading theory of perception, the exact neural implementation remains a challenge. To this end, we developed a biologically plausible model of perception using the 4 major classes of neuron and their laminar organization in the visual cortex, to which you have already been introduced by my colleague, Giulia Moreni. This is how predictive coding can be implemented in cortical columns. The microcircuit engaging in representation makes predictions about sensory inputs arriving in the area below. In return, they receive errors in prediction from the 2 prediction error microcircuits and refine the internal representation of sensory inputs accordingly. The 2 prediction error microcircuits signal positive and negative error respectively. Positive in case the bottom-up sensory input is stronger than the top-down prediction, and negative in the opposite case. Now, if we simplify the complex circuit figures into boxes, we can visualize how the model can expand to include multiple areas within the visual processing hierarchy, such as primary visual cortex and several higher visual areas. Let's move beyond theory and explore whether this model can actually construct perceptual representations. After training the model with a set of visual stimuli, it was indeed able to reconstruct incoming sensory inputs. Our model incorporates principles of cortical network functioning and shows that the basic task of image representation can be learned by this realistic network. My colleague, Matthias Brucklacher, will next show how this basic model can be upscaled to perform more complex perceptual and cognitive functions.
My name is Matthias Brucklacher and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Amsterdam. To interpret incoming sensory signals, it is important to realize that we are constantly acting and interacting with the world, and thus need to learn about the consequences of our own movements when processing sensory signals. In visual perception, the apparent motion of patterns across our retina, termed optic flow, can be caused by 2 processes. Either the observed object moves, shifting its projection across the retina, or we, the observers, move. Typically, what we perceive is a combination of both, leaving our brain with the challenge of identifying which parts of the optic flow are due to self-generated motion and which are externally caused. Our model solves this problem through 2 predictive streams. First, inputs from the lateral geniculate nucleus are routed to early visual areas V1 and V2. There, optic flow resulting from ego motion is explained away by predictive feedback from motor areas. The connections that convert motor signals into sensory coordinates are learned and thus experience dependent. Here, our model reproduces experimental data from V1 neurons in mice, where the same kind of experience-dependent sensory motor computation has been discovered. What cannot be predicted from self-motion reaches the second stream of cortical processing modeled here. It's composed of the middle temporal cortex and adjacent areas. This stream learns to focus on the presence of external objects. Thresholding top-down signals here neatly segments out the object and ignores the background. Importantly, each area consists of a population of interconnected neurons. Here you can see that the model correctly identifies the external object. It is also from these higher level visual areas that object identity can be read out with good accuracy, highlighting the power of multi-area predictive coding models.
My name is Jorge Mejías and I am group leader in computational neuroscience at the University of Amsterdam. Thanks to the research infrastructure eBrains, we have been able to critically advance our understanding of visual perception by developing and studying computational models of the brain. These models cover different scales, from biophysically detailed microcircuits to large-scale models involving interareal communication. Integrating the knowledge we gain with each of these models is a fundamental part of our research. Our brains use different strategies at increasing anatomical scales, from the erratic activation of single neurons at the microscopic level to the coordinated oscillations of electrical activity at larger scales. By connecting these scales, we better understand how physiological brain dynamics gives rise to visual perception. We have been able to do this by using eBrain services, ranging from simulation platforms and data analysis tools to visualization software and data storage. In our research for this showcase of the Human Brain Project, we unified realistic models of the cortex to a plausible architecture for predictive processing and extended these to multi-area networks capable of object segmentation. This has allowed us to find a novel avenue to understand perception, gaining insight into how objects are recognized and pop out from the background when the subject is moving. Beyond its usefulness to understand sensory predictions, our work will be helpful to investigate how perception can be impaired in brain disorders such as autism or schizophrenia, and to design novel architectures for neuromorphic chips, which will foster the next frontiers in robotics and artificial intelligence.